morning. Thank you for joining. Today, we are going to talk about foliar fertilizer opportunities. We'll specifically focus on late season. So I'm Jessica Link, and then I have Jeff Gilder here. We're going to pass it off back and forth throughout the presentation to talk about foliar feeding. So like I said, today we're going to focus on the V5 and forward in both corn and soybeans. We have our high yield programs, what I have on the screen here is corn, and I have outlined mostly what we're going to talk about. You can find these on our website for a variety of crops, and they really outline a lot of our fertilizer recommendations throughout the entirety of the growing season, depending on your management style. We have a good, better, and best program. The best is really going to be pushing that yield, maximizing it to the best of our ability. And all of these products and applications are meant to be piggybacked on other applications throughout that you're going on the field. We don't want to require additional trips across the field to gain this benefit. So piggyback these fertilizers and applications onto what's already going across with your side dress, herbicide, and fungicide applications. Everything very tank mix friendly. Always recommend a chart test first. So firstly, I want to talk about why are we foliar feeding? So when you have everything in the ground and everything is going great, we want to make it even better. So applying foliar fertilizer is going to be an incredibly efficient way of putting fertilizer onto your crops. And when we talk about these, we can have anywhere from 6 to 20 times more efficient than soil applied fertilizers. That does not mean that foliar feeding replaces soil applied fertilizers, but this is going to help put that fertilizer where it needs at specific timings throughout the growing seasons to capitalize on minimizing our stress and making sure that nutrition is not a limiting factor. So this is just a reiteration of the last slide, just putting it in a different form of context of the efficiency of the foliar fertilizer we're applying. So putting it in terms of our actual nutrients, every nutrient is a little bit different, but one example here is 1 pound of nitrogen applied as a foliar is equivalent to 4 pounds if you apply it through the soil. And that varies by nutrient. So 1 pound of magnesium applied through the leaf tissue is equivalent to 75 pounds applied to the soil. So really just putting that fertilizer right where it needs to be and brought up through the leaf tissue. When we talk about foliars, we like to divide it up into 3 separate parts. Really early season is going to be focusing on our overall plant health as that crop transitions into a very stressful period, determining the number of rows around the ear and starting a really rapid growth. If we can minimize stress the best we can, we're allowing that crop to focus on what's important at that time, which is maximizing yield, even though it's only at the V5 growth stage. Once the number of kernels around the ear are established at V5, you can't change it later on in the season. So minimizing stress so the crop can do that, you're going to be in a much better position come harvest. And then if we look mid-season, we are going to work on our deficiencies. So as the season progresses, nutrient deficiencies start to pop up, visual deficiencies start to occur, the symptoms, but it is really important to know that once you have a visual symptom of a deficiency, your yield has already been impacted. So if we can mitigate that the best that we can by providing adequate nutrition throughout the season, then our yield won't be impacted by nutrient deficiencies. And again, another critical growth stage in corn is by the V10 growth stage, the length of our ear is determined. And once that's determined, we can't go back and change it. So just like at the V5 growth stage, if we can minimize stress and give that crop everything it needs at that growth stage, it can focus on what its job is at that time, which is to create a very large ear. Then finally, our third part is feed the plant. So going through at the R4 growth stage, late season where that crop is really filling out those ears. So at this point, we have our ear size determined as in terms of length and rows around. But if we can just make that kernel size and avoid kernel abortion the best that we can, so we can give that crop the nutrition that it needs to create the largest ear possible. So like I said, I talked quite a bit right now about the foliar part 1 in the last slide, but again, we want to piggyback these herbicides or piggyback these nutritionals with herbicides to help that crop focus and increase our overall plant health. We had a foliar webinar already in this part 1, which you can find on our YouTube page, and you can have a full webinar going just specifically about our early season foliars. Specifically, though, just talking about it right now is we have Phosphix. So if you're applying any herbicides, include Phosphix in the tank, because that will increase your crop recovery and improve your overall plant health. We also have MicroBlitz, which will be a micronutrient package, and Sweet and Easy, which is going to give that crop a little bit of an energy boost.
Good. Well, thanks, Jessica. We're going to touch base on kind of the part 2 of the foliar program, which is really talking about making sure that we don't have any nutrient deficiencies during that mid-season part of our growing season here. So when we talk about rapid growth, we're really talking about moving through our vegetative growth stages. Jessica mentioned, those critical growth stages at that V5 for the rows around, and by that V10 for determining that length of the ear. So really, we're talking about maximizing our yield potential during this. So this is a corn plant that was spray painted, and then we came back the next day and took some pictures, and this is really just the growth of that corn plant over the course of a 24-hour period. So we're talking about a lot of cell division, a lot of cell elongation that's going to take in during that time, a lot of nutrient needs, to support that rapid growth. We always like to touch on kind of this idea of the law of minimums and defeating any nutrient deficiencies. The idea here is the water in the stave bucket is going to represent our yield potential that's out there, and any time that we have a deficiency out there, we start to shorten those staves, which is really going to impact our yield potential that's out there at that point in time. So if we can keep our nutrients at those adequate levels, we're going to maximize our yield potential that's out there, and we really don't want a micronutrient being the issue, or being what's going to cause a nutrient deficiency, which is going to end up in a yield minimizing time there. We're going to touch base on the function of the micronutrients, in terms of how they're going to function in the plant, where that deficiency is going to take place. And as we go through here and we start to touch base on some of our foliar opportunities, you can see where we've incorporated boron, manganese, some copper, some iron into these application timings, and we just wanted to touch base on the why part. So really, in terms of boron, we see a really improved seed set under some stressful conditions. It's a nutrient that we like to talk about spoon feeding, because of the small amounts that we like to see given during the course of the growing season. But in terms of corn plants, one of the biggest things that we see with boron is the support that we get during that pollination time frame, when we hit that reproductive stages of tasseling, and that ear development. The elongation of the pollen tubes, is going to be a big thing. And usually where we're going to see a deficiency is in the side of, like on a soybean plant, where we see poor flowering out there, or in a vegetable crop where we see a poor seed set, or a poor fruit set that's out there. And in terms of a corn plant, usually when we have that boron deficiency, it's going to be in poor pollination. Manganese, I like to talk about that one being kind of a multitasker. It plays a lot of roles in the plant. The biggest ones that we see are going to be in the form of photosynthesis, aiding in that chlorophyll production, required in higher amounts in soybeans and in wheat. The picture that you see there to the right is really going to be that classic interveinal chlorosis that we see when we see a manganese deficiency. And these things happen in generally in a cooler, wetter environment is where we're going to see that manganese deficiency. Copper is generally going to be immobile in the soil system, but it does play some big roles here when we see chlorophyll formation, lots of different interactions that we see in the plant. One of the biggest ones is going to be protein synthesis. And where we see a copper deficiency, you're going to see that stunted plant like you see to the picture there to the right. If you've got some weed out there right now and you start to see some wilted tips, potentially that could be copper. Iron plays a big role in the form of chlorophyll also. So you can kind of see a theme here. When that plant needs the sun to produce some energy, we need those micronutrients to really play a key role in that chlorophyll formation and production. In soybeans, iron's going to have kind of a symbiotic relationship in nitrogen fixation. And in our legumes, it's going to help carry oxygen to those nodules. That picture on the right there, when you see an iron deficiency, it's that really bold looking, strong looking chlorosis is what you're going to see on that plant. And then zinc, we'll kind of touch base on zinc here. Zinc is really one of the most common nutrient deficiencies that you're going to see, especially in corn. Zinc availability is going to decrease as our soil pH increases. We tend to think of zinc more as the micronutrient that we add into the starters, but zinc does play a big role during the course of the whole growing season, especially as we get to those reproductive growth stages. So when you think about flowering and pollination, internodal elongation, zinc plays a tremendous role in that. One of the interesting things about zinc, though, is that it usually ends up being symptomless. You don't see the zinc deficiencies out in the field until you start taking some tissue tests, and that's where you'll see that. We've got a slide here, or a picture here of the Great Lakes region with some A&L labs, and you can see that the majority of the soil testing are going to show some deficiencies in zinc. And then as we look across the whole U.S., especially the Corn Belt, and as we get into our central states there, a lot of deficient soil tests coming back in zinc. So if we can think about zinc in the starter application, but also think about zinc in your foliar applications also. A couple products we're going to touch base on here that Jessica mentioned that fit into this part 2, or kind of this mid-season timing, are going to be Phosphix and MicroBlitz. Phosphix is our 749 with a trace micronutrients. Contains a phosphite that's going to help with plant growth and disease management. We have a humic and fulvic acid there that are kind of going to be our delivery system that's going to help get the nutrients inside the plant. And then we have our plant extracts, or our natural plant growth regulators. The cytokinins really promote cell division. The gibberellic acids are going to promote cell elongation, and the auxins come into play on that differentiation that you'll see in the cells, and really play a big role when we transfer from that vegetative state to the reproductive states. Phosphix is one of the Beck's PFR proven products. We've shown you this slides in the past, but it is a product that's gone through a tremendous amount of testing, and we're very comfortable making that application early in the growing season. This is a slide that we like to show in terms of plant health, stress mitigation, faster recovery, especially when you're making those early herbicide applications, or even some later herbicide applications, that you're going to see that stress mitigation with Phosphix. So you can see the post-emerge, and then you can see the kind of that side by side with the regrowth there. This is another one that we like to show, and this is a treated versus an untreated. With a herbicide application, you can definitely see that faster recovery, that stress mitigation that we're going to get out of Phosphix. The other product is going to be our MicroBlitz. Our MicroBlitz is an NPK, has a nice micronutrient blend to it, plus it has the benefits of the fulvic acid kind of as our delivery system to help get those nutrients inside the plant. 1185, boron, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. So we kind of touch base on those micronutrients, what their function was going to be in that plant. And we've got a nice balance here. When we think about the molybdenum, and we start to think about soybeans, it's nitrogen fixation and turning those nitrates into some amino acids then. The micronutrients are going to be in an EDTA form, and this is a great tank mix partner when you're out there making those early season, mid-season applications. This one, we have a Bex PFR proven on this product also. This was on soybeans at a 1 quart rate, and you can see it's at that R1. We'll talk about the benefits of that R1 application a little bit later here.
Thank you, Jeff. So transitioning into the late season, this is the third part of our foliar program. We are working on focusing on pollination and grain fill. Like Jeff had said, at this point, our yield potential has been established. So now the main job is to getting that crop to fill out the ear and work up to its most maximum potential. So at this point, if we can give that crop everything it needs instead of having to scavenge for nutrients, then it's going to fill out that ear and carry the plant through grain fill. If you see the picture on the bottom, that's a situation that can happen if we don't adequately prepare this plant to proceed with grain fill. It can abort the kernels and you don't have them filled all the way out to the tip. Also, when it comes to the late season, we are getting some disease presence in the field very frequently. So if we can have a very healthy plant, it will be in a better position to defend against these diseases and other environmental pressures. For instance, tar spot has been a pretty problematic in the past, and if you have a healthier plant, it will be in a better position to defend against tar spot versus if you have a very unhealthy plant, it will be susceptible and come down to that disease very, very quickly. Jeff had mentioned about boron being especially important at tassel and in reproductive stages, and I'm just here to reiterate that on this slide. So if you don't have boron, you don't have an ear because it has a very integral role in our reproductive pollen and tassel formation. So you will have very ugly, very ununiform, not filled out ears if you don't have an adequate supply. Boron is needed in very small amounts. But it is still very, very important. So we like to say that you should spoon feed boron throughout the season. If you have too much of it, it can become toxic, but you still want to have an adequate supply so that these ears can fill out at harvest. And then we also have nitrogen. So everybody knows how important nitrogen is to the crop early in the season, but you also need it late to help that crop through the finish line. So if you don't have enough nitrogen, the crop will cannibalize itself to fill out that ear. And you can see that when you start seeing nitrogen deficiencies on those lower leaves late in the season. The crop is taking that nitrogen and all of those nutrients because it's mobile in the crop, taking it from that vegetative tissue and putting it into the ear. And then when you have that situation, you have a lot less stalk strength, you are prone to lodging, and not really great when that combine goes through the field. So late season, V8 to VT, the corn crop needs about 9 to 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day. And then after VT, that goes to about 2 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day. So at that time, you still have 40 to 60 days until black layer. So you have a pretty significant amount of nitrogen need still into that late season. And then when it comes to some product recommendations, one I want to touch on is Sweet and Easy, which is a liquid sugar blend. It's a blend of 3 different sugars plus a nitrogen source for stabilization. When we talk about Sweet and Easy, we like to use the analogy of starting a fire because it's going to give a very quick energy boost. And when you think of your soil fertility, you have in starting a fire, you have your logs, which are your NPK and your soil health. That's going to be the base of your fire, a very long burning source of nutrition for that crop. And then when you need a little bit more of a flame and you have your sticks and kindling, that's going to help set fire to those logs, which we like to compare as a starter. So that's going to give moderate to sustainable energy to the fire. But when it comes to Sweet and Easy, that's going to be your paper. That's going to catch fire to everything else. It's going to be very quick burning, but it's going to have a lot of energy very quickly. And that's our Sweet and Easy. I also like to compare it to a cup of coffee about 2 o'clock. Just a quick pick me up to give that crop a little bit more energy. And then we have our Overpass as another product recommendation, and this is going to help fulfill that nitrogen need late in the season. It's 2202. 25% of that nitrogen is going to be in the slow release form, and it also includes sulfur and boron, which are very important late season nutrients. a little bit of research on it. This was a trial done in Ohio this past year, so 2022. We had Overpass applied, and we saw a pretty good yield increase when we applied our Overpass in combination with fulvic LQ to help that go into the plant a little bit quicker, and then help that crop utilize those nutrients. And then same thing with Sweet and Easy. When we combine those two, we saw a pretty significant yield increase. And I will pass it back to Jeff for soybeans.
Well, good. Thanks, Jessica. What we're going to touch base on here, really, when we talk about making recommendations foliar onto soybeans, in terms of yield potential, it's really going to be from that V5 up to that R3 timing. So when you start to count nodes out there, depending on if you count that top one or not, you know, at that V5, we're really looking at 5 nodes that are out there. You might start to see some branches that are going to be on that nodes, you know, but this is really a time where we start to see some really rapid growth in that plant. Now, generally before we hit that R1 or that first bloom. So when we think about, you know, our R1 to our R3 timings here, this is really where our yield potential comes into play. When we talk corn, you know, we talk about a V5 to a V8, V10 scenario, you know, with our rows around our length of our ear, you know, but these growth stages here on soybeans is where we set our yield potential out in that plant. So that R1 is going to be that first bloom or that first flower that you're going to see on any node that's out in the plant. And then as we progress from that R2 to that R3, where R3 is really our pod formation, a lot of nutrient use at this point in time, especially as we start to develop that pod, a lot of calcium, a lot of potassium at this point in time, a lot of cell structure that's going to take place. Generally, this is that R3 timing is generally that last pass of a herbicide. A lot of fungicide applications are going to be made at this point in time also. So, you know, just think of these as kind of where we're building our yield potential at. One of the nutrients that's extremely important when we're at this first flower to this first pod is going to be potassium. So after nitrogen that the plant's making for itself, potassium is going to be this the nutrient in terms of second greatest amount that's going to be absorbed into the plant. And we like to talk about supplementing some potassium at this point in time to keep that plant healthy, and because we know that that a healthy plant is going to be in a better position to defend against disease pressures. And when we think about the application at this point in time, you know, we can start to talk about putting weights into those individual beans, some weights into those pods, you know, and really starting to increase our test weight. Another one that we'd like to talk about at this point in time in soybeans is going to be manganese. You know, manganese is really a multitasker out there. You know, and this is when we make those last herbicide passes, especially a glyphosate. We know that glyphosate can start to tie up some manganese in the plant and in the soil. So there is some potential for some deficiencies that are out there. A great opportunity, especially if you're going out with a fungicide, to make a manganese application at this point in time. And when we think about that multitasking, you know, it's really about chlorophyll formation and helping with that nitrogen that plant is producing at this point in time. So a couple products that we like to touch base on in our high yield programs are going to be our Correct. Correct is our potassium acetate product. And another product that fits into the same category for us is going to be our Correct Plus. Correct Plus is a 3015 with a boron and manganese component, and we've talked about the importance of the boron and manganese. So Correct is a 3020. The nitrogen derived from urea. Jessica touched base earlier in the presentation about the value of a nitrogen application with a foliar urea with that 4-to-1 ratio. And then our potassium is going to be in the form of a potassium acetate. So potassium acetates have the highest absorption through the leaves in that foliar application. Rate-wise, on the foliar side, we like to see, you know, at least a half a gallon up to 2 gallons, you know, in the traditional row crop world and into the vegetables. So timing wise, we've talked about Correct before being used as a starter, but on the foliar side, we really like to see it a little bit later in the season. So it's going to be that late V5 through the R1, R3 timings on the soybeans, and a great tank mix companion when you're doing a fungicide application. Little data from last year. This was a trial that we did out in South Dakota. You can see that the untreated trial was almost 72 bushels, so it was a really good yield out there, and we were able to see some improvements when we made the correct application. So that center bar is going to be correct by itself, and then the bar to the left is going to be correct with the fulvic acid. Jessica talked about the benefits of Sweet and Easy. In our trials, we like to interchange fulvic acid and the Sweet and Easy to try to see the benefits there. When I show you the Overpass slide, we actually use Sweet and Easy in that one. But when we add that extra delivery method in there, whether it be a fulvic acid or the Sweet and Easy, we are seeing an increase when we add those into the tank. And then Overpass, which is our 10-2-10 with a boron and manganese component to this. Just like what Jessica had mentioned earlier with that urea application, where we're going to see a nice efficiency when we use urea in that foliar application, plus the urea trizone. This is going to be a 25% slow release product for us with an EDTA and manganese in that boron application. So when we think about boron on soybeans, we're really thinking about helping with that flower set that's out there and that pod formation. And then again, this was the untreated check, was roughly 72 bushel. This is the same plot that we had the correct in. We've seen a nice increase when we were Overpass 10-2-10 by itself, and this is at the R3 timing. And then when we added the tank mix companion in with the Sweet and Easy, we've seen a little bit of a bump there. So both of them had really nice return on investments that we've seen in that plot, even though that plot really had a high yield potential to it right from the get-go. So it's nice to see, in those higher yield environments that we're seeing some increases out there when we are making our applications.
Thank you. So that wraps it up for all of our product recommendations in regards to the foliar season. So up next, we will talk about some additional resources that are available to you if you want some light reading, a little bit more information about some of this. So firstly, we have our high yield programs, which I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. So we have these for a variety of crops, from corn to organic corn to sugar beets and a lot of crops in between. So if you go to our website, we'll send out an email after this webinar, including links. You can download those high yield programs if you're looking for how well our products fit into a complete program. We also have our Foliar Feeding white paper, which outlines a lot of what we talked about today with product recommendations. We also have our 2022 research guide. Jeff and I each mentioned some of our research trials from this past year. If you want some more information on any of those, we dive a little bit deeper, give a bit more background in all of the trials that we did, and give some pretty great highlights from our research of the previous year. We have our YouTube page, the Anderson's Plant Nutrient Agriculture. That's where you can find previous webinars. I mentioned early in this presentation, our early season foliar webinar is available on that webpage on YouTube. We also have tar spot, which can be pretty problematic coming into late season, depending on the conditions. So we have a tar spot fact sheet if you are looking for recommendations of how to help put yourself in a better position to defend against tar spot. And same for Cercospora leaf spot in sugar beets. And then as we head into wheat harvest, if you have any questions on double crops, we have this quick reference fact sheet, which I know we didn't talk about double crops today, but we do have a fact sheet available. And as always, your territory managers are available to answer any questions, but you can reference this for some quick product recommendations on how to best manage your double crops. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your territory manager, and that is all we have for today. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.